Hey everybody, my name is Brendan Noble and I'm a young adult author. Welcome back to my Slavic Saturday series where we talk about Slavic history, mythology, and folklore related to my Slavic fantasy book series. This week we're talking about a very important god, probably the second most important god in Slavic mythology, and that is Veles, who is the god of the Underworld, the Lowlands, and cattle. Before I get too far into Veles, I just want to make a note that for my first book in my Slavic fantasy series, A Dagger in the Winds, I'm currently looking for beta readers and early reviewers. So if you're interested in that, please click the links in the comments below. But now let's dive into Veles. So normally in religions, the god of the underworld, whether it's Hades or the Christian devil, is not necessarily a god, but kind of serves that role, is usually considered an evil figure. They tend to have a lot of negative things associated with him, which makes Veles kind of a unique god in this aspect, where he's the god of Navia, which is the underworld in Slavic mythology, but he tends to actually be a positive figure. Navia is considered almost a paradise instead of the bleak underworld of the Greeks, or the hell that the devil looks over. There isn't a good afterlife or a bad afterlife in Slavic myth unless you become a demon, and I talk about that more in my post about Yavia, Navia, and Pravia, which is in my playlist attached here. But Veles, because he oversees Navia as this paradise, is actually often revered instead of hated as a god. So Veles is typically pictured as an old man with gray hair and a long gray beard, often with a wooden cane. He tends to be associated with, and he can shapeshift into, a bear, a snake, or cattle, and he often takes upon these kind of traits of these animals with bear fur or horns that are cattle horns. And he can also transform into a snake as well, and this is why, if you look at a picture of the world tree from Slavic myth, often you'll see an eagle at the top to represent Perun, and a serpent at the bottom to represent Veles and Navia. And this kind of contrast between Perun and Veles is a large part of Veles' character, and it's a large theme in Slavic mythology as well, this kind of dualistic conflicting of forces where there's not necessarily a good side and an evil side, can be a very common factor. And the conflict between Perun with his control over the mountains, sky, and highlands versus Veles' control over the lowlands, rivers, and Navia is kind of a very big example of this. And it was mentioned in many Slavic stories. But this rivalry between the two, it's because there's so few primary sources, it can be hard to know exactly what the original story was for it. Some say that Veles stole cattle from Perun. Some say that he stole wives from Perun. But my favorite story, and one that potentially is the most compelling, is the fact that is one that Veles stole Eurylo, which is Perun's son, at birth, and took him to Navia to raise him in the underworld as himself. Regardless of the start of this story, Perun has declared war on Veles. It's known that lightning strikes coming from the sky are often considered Perun's attacks against Veles, who's hiding behind rocks or underground at certain locations. And whether or not Rillo has an impact on this is kind of it's an important part of the story, but this battle is continuing to rage no matter what throughout Slavic myth, and they often get so distracted with this battle that they refuse to get involved in other stories because of it. But this kind of stealing or trickery side of Veles is only a part of his personality. You see that, unlike a lot of, again, like Hades and other gods, he has a lot of positive traits. It is important that he helps guide the souls along his rivers to Navia so that they don't get trapped on Earth or Yavia as demons. He protects nature. He shows divination rituals to his shamans that can help the tribes know what was coming. So he had a lot of these positive aspects as well to him, and especially helping agriculture as well and cattle. This was a very important part because Slavs, agriculture was a essential part of early Slavic culture, and Slavic, especially lowland peasants who would worship him because of this, often revered him over Perun because of that. So it's not necessarily known too much about Veles' personal relationships with the other gods besides Perun, but it is known that either Mokosh, who is also Perun's wife, or Dijavana, who is Perun's daughter, was his spouse. It depends on the story you look at there. I find the Dijavana story incredibly interesting. After Perun it kind of ruled over Pravia and Dijavana rebelled against him, she lost, and Perun forced her to marry Veles as punishment for her revolt. And at first, Dijavana and Veles didn't get along. Dijavana is the goddess of the wilds and the hunt. She is an incredibly independent character in Slavic myth, a very feminist icon, and she did not appreciate this forced marriage. But in time, Veles turned himself into a basil flower, which soothed her wild soul. And what this did is they didn't necessarily fall in love, but it helped form an alliance between the two of them that is a combination between agriculture, the wilds, different types of nature, and Navia. It's a very powerful alliance in Slavic myth because of that. Now, in my book, A Dagger in the Winds, in the series throughout it, Veles has a distant but ever-increasing role throughout the series. He will play a interesting part with, again, this dualistic nature of both being a trickster but also having good elements, where it's up to Václav and Atilia, the two main characters in the books, to decide whether his intentions are good or ill and whether they're going to work with him or not. So that's what I have for you guys today on my Slavic Saturday series. I hope that you guys enjoy these videos, and if you do, please remember to like and subscribe down below. I come out with them usually every Saturday. And stay tuned in upcoming weeks where I'll talk more about A Dagger in the Winds, both here on Facebook and on Instagram, so be sure to follow me there on multiple sources. See you guys next week.